Hey fellow S2000 owners, I'm back with my second video for my channel, and I really don't post much about my car because there's a lot of videos out there that cover how to pretty much everything, with the exception of rear suspension upgrades. I found it quite interesting that there were little to no videos whatsoever on the rear suspension of the vehicle. There's a couple of videos of changing bearings and hubs out. There's a couple of videos on refreshing the front suspension, but none for the rear suspension. So what I'm working on this week is, as you can see by the mess I have in my garage, is I'm doing the suspension on both ends, front and rear end of my car. Now I'm not going to say anything about the front suspension because there's quite a handful of videos that show how to remove everything, especially those pesky caster bolts that need to get cut off, which I had to cut one. The other one actually came out. So I'm just gonna give you a quick description of the back side of the car. As you can see here on the floor, I have laid out all the suspension components, upper lower control arms for both front and rear of the vehicle, along with the track arm. My knuckles are sitting there. I'm actually trying to get the dust covers off, but the bolts are pretty rusted out, so I got them showered in some PB Blaster. I am going to change the bearings and the hubs as well on the car. They're already pressed out and ready to go. But what's quite interesting is I bought the energy suspension kit, and by no means necessary I am sponsored, nor am I sponsoring energy suspension. I just decided to go with their polyurethane kit for the front and for the rear because it was the most complete kit out there for a very reasonable price, and I chose the black rubber because according to the reviews it squeaks less than the red one. So for those of you out there that are doing both front and rear suspension and not quite sure on how to tackle the rear, besides what it says in the service manual, because I do have it and I read it and I looked at it, the upper control arm is quite easy, just like the front control arm basically. The front upper control arm. Now the lower control arm and this track bar right here, it goes attached to the back of the knuckle, and I found it easier to unbolt the track bar from the bushing first. When I took the knuckle out, I took the bar with me, and then there was some clearance, better clearance, to put the 17mm socket on the castle nut and drive it out and get it out of there. Now the lower control arm, the pins and bolts came out quite easy. Now when you buy the energy suspension bushing set, some of the bushings have to be burned out because you need to reuse the outer shell. That's particularly true here in the front lower control arm. As you can see, I still have the outer shell from the factory bushings on all three positions, as it says on the instructions. Really, you just put heat all the way around it so you see that bushing smoke out a little bit. And I just really punched it out with a hammer. It fell out pretty quickly. All three positions on both lower control arms. And then on the rear control arm, it would be just on your shock bushing. It's the only one that you really need to reuse the inner shell. Now, the short one right here gets pressed out, and it's quite easy to do so as well. But this little sucker here is a two-part bushing, just like the one that you're going to install when you put the kit back together. And when you read the instructions, which, pardon the mess in my garage, but I've been at this one pretty much all morning. When you look at the instructions that come with the suspension kit, it says to chisel away at the inner portion of the bushing until it comes out. Well, that may be true if you have a car that's maybe 3 to 4 years new and you're doing the suspension refresh, but when your car is 17 years old and it has over 150,000 miles on it, I guarantee you that a hammer and a chisel are not getting that thing out. I hammered away at one of them for over an hour, and all I could do was just open the lip enough for me to get a reciprocating saw in there and cut the collar of the inner portion of the bushing right here. This is what it looks like when it's installed. So I just pretty much picked up this lip right here and I cut inside here, as you can see, and then I pressed the remainder of the bushing. You can see the two parts right there. I pressed it through completely one way with the press. Now I do have a 12-ton hydraulic press from Harbor Freight, and the $99 that I paid for it pretty much paid for themselves yesterday when I pressed out every single one of those bushings, the hubs and the bearings out of this car. Now, of course, Energy Suspension claims that the new bushings, when they get installed, you can actually press them by hand. You may be able to tap them in with a hammer. We'll see if I don't have to use the press again, but I'm definitely going to have to use it when I put new bearings and hubs in it. So that's it, guys. Just wanted to give you a little insight on how to take the rear suspension out, because like I said, I could not find any videos out there of anybody doing rear suspension work on their S2000s. If you're like me, you like to keep the OEM parts as much as possible. That's what it takes to take out the rear. Now I do still need to remove this portion of the end link right here. I cut it off because the bolt was so rusted that it stripped on the inside. So I still need to get that part off. I just cut them off just to get the suspension off out of the car. And I do have the sway bar links, the sway bar bushings as well, to replace both front and rear. So if you got any questions on doing the rear suspension, let me know. I'm still working on it. I will post part 2 of the video when I have all the bushings pressed in and ready to install. Right before I put the tires back on, I'll put a video of what everything looks like once it's put back together, nice and cleaned up. I'm gonna clean all this stuff up, sandblast it, paint it nice and black, and get it back on. Alright guys, good luck out there if you're attempting this job sometime in the future.